I love fiction as much as the next guy, right? Like, I understand that some of the greatest books that have ever been written are fiction books. That said, I'm also a nonfiction lover, and I think when it comes to booktube creators, that kind of sets me aside. I love me a historical nonfiction. I love me a self-help book. I love me a psychology book. 2 of the 3 books that I have on my bedstand right now are nonfiction books. And the reason we're talking about nonfiction books today instead of just regular old fiction is because the LA Times just released their 30 best nonfiction books of the last 30 years. All right, y'all, so I don't know what happened, but for some reason when I was filming this, I didn't do an intro. So what's up, y'all? Welcome back to another video. If this isn't a welcome back for some reason, let me introduce myself. My name's Chris. I know how to read. Allegedly! And like past me was saying, we're gonna be talking about nonfiction books today. Let's go. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because since it's of the last 30 years, I probably haven't heard of a lot of these books. Like, I'm going through this list for the first time with y'all, so I'm excited to see if there are any books that I have read, but I'm more excited to see if there are any books that I haven't read that I want to add to my to-buy list or to my to-be-read list. Whether you agree or disagree with the inclusions and yes, exclusions, one thing remains true: after 30 go-rounds, there's nothing better than getting together to talk about books. And I really like that point, and I'm glad that they included it in the article. I think it was for the Heaven and Earth grocery store, but I made a video on kind of third places and how important they are. And that's why, like, of course it's better to support your local bookstore than it is to go to like a Barnes & Noble or something like that. But I still like that places like Barnes & Noble exist because it gives people, like libraries, and I'm glad libraries exist too, these places give people the opportunity to talk about books. So this video, this list, gives us the opportunity to do that, so I'm excited. David Sedaris's Me Talk Pretty One Day, which was released in the year 2000. I've never heard of this before. He recounts his childhood, travels, and growth as a writer with trademark wit and humor. Whether writing about accidentally coming out as gay to his music teacher, learning French as a 41-year-old, or feeling crushing jealousy for his artistically gifted sister, Sedaris approaches every new experience with a wide-eyed curiosity. This book sounds really interesting. This definitely strikes me as a library book. Like, I don't think I would go out and buy this, but memoirs are something that I haven't really gotten into. I know I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy last year, and then this year, one of my favorite books still that I've read this year, and maybe all time, I read Educated by Tara Westover. I think those are the only memoirs that I've ever really gotten into. But this one definitely interests me. We're gonna add this to the maybe list. I think we're gonna have a definitive cop list, we're gonna have a maybe list, and a not interested list. This one goes in the maybe. Next up, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History by Elizabeth Colbert, released in 2014. I think I've seen this cover around like a Barnes & Noble or something like that. A Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the world's slide into environmental destruction is an essential read. The New Yorker staff writer makes the case for the effects of climate change bringing about a new age of extinctions on our planet. This definitely isn't a definitive cop, and it definitely isn't a not read. So I think we're gonna add it to the maybe list again. This reminds me of Overstory, which is another Pulitzer Prize winner and another one of my favorite books of all time. Kind of learning more about our planet, our ecosystem, our environment, and how they kind of all coexist and need each other to survive sounds really interesting. And like I said, I feel like I've seen this book before, and I really like this cover, so we're gonna add it to the maybe list, but I am interested in the whole concept of this book. Next up, we have Thick and Other Essays, released by Tressie McMillan Cottom in 2019. Thick description is a means of cultural analysis in which events and objects are studied in relation to the societies that produce them. In Thick, Cottom plays with that meaning as well as thick as a descriptor of Black women's bodies in popular culture. What results is a series of stunning essays that are personal, incisive cultural criticism, very funny, and deeply sad. I've never read like an essay collection or anything like that, at least I don't think I have, so this definitely intrigues me. I think the definitive cop list is gonna be for things that I want to immediately add to my TBR, and there are definitely books that I want to read more than Thick currently, but so far, 3 books in, we have 3 additions to the maybe list, so I think that's pretty good. So far, 10% of the way through this list, we've got 3 maybes, and I think that's an accomplishment in and of itself. Next up, I have heard about this book, and I've heard many good things about this book, The Looming Tower, Al-Qaeda, and the Road to 9/11 by Lawrence Wright, written in 2006. They hate our freedom was the facile catchphrase that many used to explain the rationale for the 9/11 terrorist attacks, regardless of all the time, blood, and treasure the U.S. military had spent in Iraq and Afghanistan in previous decades. Of course, the motivations behind the terrorist actions were more complicated. Wright's thorough investigation into the lives of the 9/11 hijackers and ringleader Osama bin Laden reveals a web of religious, financial, and political alliances running up against the U.S. counterterrorism activities that often stoked further anger. The tensions were only exacerbated by the often petty rivalries between the CIA and the FBI that eroded coordination and prompted most leaders to miss the attacks as they were being planned and executed. I've heard very good things about this book and this author, and I think the last time I was in a Barnes & Noble, which was a few months ago if I remember correctly, I saw this book and I was already interested by the little blurb on the back of it when I picked it up to read it. So our first addition to the definitive cop list comes on the 4th book on this list. I'll take it. Next up, we have another Pulitzer Prize winner, Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life by William Finnegan, released in 2015. Longtime New Yorker staff writer Finnegan, he of the muscular award-winning reporting from South America, Africa, and Europe, turns his ferocious discipline, steely appraisal, and sparkling vocabulary to a lifetime of chasing waves across the world. Come for the generous and refreshing portrayals of smacking the lip, but stay for the riveting thrill, for instance, of finding and surfing remote equatorial breaks no one had ever surfed before and few have written about since. Off rip, I know and I recognize that I am basing my entire opinion of these books off of the cover and this little description that an author writes, but I think this is going to be our first addition to the I'm not interested list. I just think I already have 11 books on my TBR that I really want to read, and these 4 books that we've read so far seem more interesting to me than Barbarian Days. No disrespect to William Finnegan, I'm sure I would enjoy this book if I got my hands on it, but until then, we're going to add it to the 3rd list. This book has really interested me. I've heard a lot of good things about this book. Number 25, Columbine by Dave Cohen, released in 2009. Cohen was one of the journalists who reported in the immediate aftermath of the Columbine High School shooting. Then, for many years after, he researched the events of that day in an effort to correct erroneous initial reports. Columbine is outstanding literary journalism, balancing the facts with intimate portraits of those who were there on that horrific day in 1999. Some Chris Read's lore, 2 videos in a row where you get some Chris Read's lore. I went to college for about 3 years for journalism before I switched my major, and I did a lot of journalism stuff in high school. So literary journalism has always been really interesting to me. I think the first literary journalism book I read was All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, if I remember the author's names correctly. And that was such a cool and interesting book about the reporting and the actual just event of the Watergate scandal with Richard Nixon. Obviously a horrific and terrible event that unfortunately continues to happen, but I'm just a booktuber. I voted. I hope y'all did too. Hopefully some changes in our government can come so stuff like this doesn't happen again. But for me, reading about this like very historical event, for better or worse, and learning more about it has always like interested me. So I think I'm going to add this to the definitive cop list immediately. Devil in the White City. I've seen this book in Barnes & Nobles a lot. Just off of the cover, this book interested me. This is The Devil in the White City, like I said, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America, written by Eric Larson in 2003. Larson centers the activities of 2 men in the years leading up to and during Chicago's 1983 World's Columbian Exposition. The fair's chief architect, Daniel Hudson Burnham, created a wildly expensive campus on Beaux Arts white buildings, brought in designers including Frederick Law Olmsted, and wowed millions with a large-scale incandescent light display. Meanwhile, haunting the fair was H.H. Holmes, the pseudonym taken by a person who was one of America's first serial killers. Based on Larson's research, he writes his nonfiction like a novel, chock-a-block full, whoa, that's a word, chock-a-block full of weird and wondrous details of Chicago at the I'm not pronouncing that.
Fin de siècle.
You got it. Yeah, definitive cop, off rip. We are on a good roll here. This cover has interested me. I've definitely heard a lot about H.H. Holmes. I've listened to a few true crime podcasts about his whole ordeal, if you want to even call it that. But to get a more of like a historical backdrop to that sounds so interesting to me. And speaking of true crime books specifically, I really enjoyed In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. And there's a book on my shelf that I'm completely forgetting the name of. I'll put it up on screen right now. But I really enjoyed this true crime novel as well. So I think this is right up my alley To the definitive cop list you go, Devil in the White City. 23, Jordan number, we have The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, released in 2015. A very small blurb here, but it revolutionized the way queer family making is written about, talked about, and comprehended. I'm gonna add this to the maybe list. Just based on how small this little review is, it revolutionized the way queer family making is written about. I don't think I've ever heard or read about queer family making. Killers of the Flower Moon at 22, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Gran. Simultaneously crushing and riveting, Killers of the Flower Moon is the true story of multiple sorrows wrought by unbridled greed and betrayal. A great first sentence for a review. I've been wanting to see the movie that this book is based off of, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. Off of knowing that the movie is great and it won a bunch of awards and it gave a bunch of Native American people proper representation, as well as this first sentence immediately getting added to the definitive cop list, but let's keep on reading. The New Yorker's Gran intertwines racism and injustices of the 1920s Oklahoma, corruption of local authorities, and the mysterious death of several Osage people, mostly women. His research is so detailed, he writes of other murders that were uncovered throughout his work that were overlooked or ignored entirely, rivaling the likes of Capote's In Cold Blood, which we just mentioned, and adapted by Martin Scorsese, another thing we just mentioned. Gran's eagle-eyed work is a non-fiction classic, and it is classically being added to the definitive cop list. Let's keep going. The New Jim Crow, another book that I've heard a lot of very good things about and that I've seen on bookshelves. Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander, released in 2010. Michelle Alexander made legible to the public the deep and enduring systems of anti-blackness that were so powerfully obscured during the so-called colorblind era. This is by an assistant professor of sociology at USC. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I've been wanting to read this very vaguely. Like, it's had a very small part in my brain, but I have been wanting to read this, so we're going to add this to the definitive cop list. I already know who this is. I'm a fan. I'm assuming this is Sapiens? Yeah, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, A Brief History of Mankind. I currently have this book in my TBR jar, even though I've already read it because I want to do a reread of it. But this book is one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, and it made my top 10 greatest books of all time video I made at the end of last year. One of the main reasons I want to do a reread of it is, one, I personally really enjoyed my first time reading it. If I remember correctly, I think I listened to the audiobook of it, but I've also heard some criticism on this book. So I really want to hop back into it eventually, just to see if it's worth the hype that I've built up for it in my head, especially since it's been so long since I read the book. Harari's ambitious work is the story of us, from our earliest moments as hunter-gatherers through our greatest challenges and to the advancements that shape the modern world. In this insightful and engaging international bestseller, Harari discusses how we got to where we are, showing readers how even our species' imperfections defined modernity and shaped our planet. This book sits with me in different ways, yet it will always be among my most recommended reads. Last year's publication of the 10th anniversary edition carries the work forward with cautionary insights of the rise of AI. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to put this on any list because I've already definitively copped this. I got this when I was in New York, but I'm excited to reread it, and like this little review says, it is also one of my most recommended reads for anybody who's interested in any nonfiction, historical or not. I just think this is a great book, and so if you haven't read it, if you have a chance to read it, this is one of the books I can honestly say highly recommend. Next up, we have Citizen, an American Lyric. I don't think I've heard of this before, by Claudia Rankin, released in 2014. An innovative, searing, poignant, fearless, and necessary book about blackness, perception, violence, and public space in America. I think I'm going to be adding this into the not interested right now list because I am much more interested in reading the New Jim Crow. So I think if I ever get my hands on New Jim Crow, I'm going to read that and then hop into Citizen. But for right now, it's being added to the third list. Say Nothing, number 18, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland, written by Patrick Radine Keefe, released in 2019. And this is another one of those books that I've seen a lot in Barnes & Noble. Keefe's vivid account of the troubles in Northern Ireland braids the stories of the 1972 disappearance of Mother Jean McConville, in Belfast, and of Dolores Price, a young activist who joined the Provisional IRA, and their long after effects. McConville's orphaned children later pursued the answers to what happened to her. Price, from a Catholic family with a history of resistance, robbed banks, set bombs, and went to prison, where she and her sister held a hunger strike. Keefe's meticulous research, empowered by tapes divulging long-held secrets, secrets results in a story without good and bad guys, just a cause worth killing and dying for, and the moral morass of upholding intractable ideals. I'm kind of hovering between a definitive cop and a maybe, specifically because I really enjoy reading true crime, but I love the true crime that's kind of taken from a historical aspect, and I hate the true crime that kind of makes a spectacle either of the murderer or the murders or the whole creates like a whole spectacle of the situation. Crime and mystery told from like a historical perspective with like an empathetic perspective, I really enjoyed. I think we're gonna add this to the definitive cop list, but it's gonna be pretty low on the list. There's other books that we've gone through so far that I want to read more than this one, but we're at 18, definitive cop. Just Kids by Patti Smith, released in 2010. We welcome rock memoirs for their leaders of vodka, dope on what really happened when the drummer freaked out, and maybe what it's like to share a sandwich with Bob Dylan. But the utterly original Patti Smith, deploying the same savage bravery, stirring creativity, and groundbreaking voice that made her iconic album Horses so unique, writes one of the best versions yet. Smith's story is an estimably mind-blowing response to the bottomless task of capturing why young and beautiful people do their relentless best in a little place called New York City. Off rip, this is being added to the not now list, to the not interested list, just because I don't have a really big interest in rock music in general, or let me rephrase that. I don't have a lot of experience with rock music in general. I would love to get introduced to it, and this book might be a good avenue for that, but there's already like 4 or 5 books on this list that I would rather read more than Just Kids by Patti Smith. But it is the not interested for right now list. So maybe in the future I will be interested in reading this, and maybe I can get it secondhand at some local bookstore. Next up at number 16, another Pulitzer Prize winner. I feel like they just went down the Pulitzer Prize list and then made this article. We have Master of the Senate by Robert Caro, released in 2002. It looks like this is an epic multi-volume biography of Lyndon Baines Johnson. The latter is now more than 3,000 pages and counting. This third volume finds Johnson redefining the power of the U.S. Senate. It also finds Caro redefining the political biography. It's not just a portrait of Johnson, but of the Senate itself, from its 19th century leaders to the late 1950s, and Johnson's unparalleled ability to bend the institution to his will. That's a great sentence. That's an interesting, or an interest-grabbing sentence. No detail is too small for Caro's gimlet eye, which is currently trained on finishing volume 5. This is volume 3? I gotta Google this. This is a 5-book series, and they're talking about book 3 in this article, and one's going to come out at some point in the future. I don't think I care about Lyndon B. Johnson that much. Hot take. Another Chris Reed's hot take. I don't know if I care about Lyndon B. Johnson to read thousands or hundreds at least of pages in this volume here, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested. We're gonna add this to the not right now list. I think that's gonna be the name of the third list. I know we've been juggling around names for that third list. At number 15, halfway through the list already, we have Solito, a memoir by Javier Zamora, released in 2022. This is an important book that illuminates the trauma of family separation, the plight of child migrants, and the perils of crossing the US-Mexico border, told from the point of view of a child left behind and offering insight into what immigrant families sacrifice and pay for a better life. This book was released in 2022, but it is unfortunately still relevant to this day. I'm gonna add this to the maybe list right now. We got a bunch of sad topics on this list so far, and I don't know if my heart and soul can take another one, but this is a type of story that 1, needs to be written, and 2, definitely needs to be read. Another memoir that I am interested in, but it's not a definitive cop just yet. On writing by Stephen King, I read my first Stephen King, The Shining, earlier this year, and I gave it 5 stars. Best known for writing horror and mystery with some big swerves, King is a surprisingly warm writing coach. The book is partly a memoir of his own normal childhood and partly notes on the business and craft of writing. Gems include a rant on critics, the assertion that the paragraph, not the sentence, is the basic unit of writing, and how writing helped alleviate his stultified misery after a near-death car accident, a look behind the curtain from an incomparable expert. This is getting added to the definitive cop list. I've been meaning to read this for a long time. I don't know if I'm ever going to write my own book. That's nowhere near like my plan of things that I want to do, but I think reading more about Stephen King and his craft, how he writes, and also what he's written throughout his life is something that generally interests me. So this is going to be added to the definitive cop list. No question. At 13, we have another memoir, Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. Growing up poor in Mississippi, woven together with sharp analysis of the ways that racism kills black men, is some of the best writing I've ever read. Ward is one of the most gifted writers of her generation. In addition to this indelible work of nonfiction, she's twice been awarded the National Book Award for Fiction and is the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship. Here, she chronicles the lives of 5 men, including her brother, who did not survive young adulthood. The memoir's double helix structure, in which Ward narrates both forward and backward, disrupts notions of time and space. Great review of this book. Never heard of this book, never heard of this author. Towards the lower end, but it's going to be added to the definitive cop list. This sounds very, very good. I'm broke and I'm not going to have a lot of money to buy all these books. An Ecology of Fear, Los Angeles and the Imagination of Disaster by Mike Davis seems like my type of book, just off the title. Mike Davis was Los Angeles' prophet and its passionate defender. There's a reason everyone was quoting Ecology of Fear after the 2025 fires. He saw our climate-addled future coming 30 years before anyone else did. That sounds so rad. Terrible situation, but rad. I'm gonna be broke by the end of this video and I haven't even bought anything yet. Definitive cop off rip. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, book 11, written by Rebecca Skloot, released in 2010. My back hurts, so we're gonna change angles. For all the ubiquity of HeLa cells in scientific research, it's remarkable that it took until 2010 for anyone to tell their origin story. But it was Skloot, as a deeply empathetic science journalist, who was able to befriend Lax's descendants, understand their perspective, more religious than scientific, and tell it with respect. This is an iconic work of narrative nonfiction that pairs unimpeachable, that's a big word, reporting with advocacy and belief. This is getting added to the interested list. This is getting added to the maybe list. This book does sound interesting, and I've seen this book, like piles of this book in like bookstores and stuff like that. So it's popular, and a bunch of people are saying it's good. What's her name who wrote CK? Whoever CK is, they have very fond things to say about this book. And so maybe not right now, but maybe in the future. That's why it's getting added to the maybe list. Fun Home, a tragicomic, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel in 2006. Pillow's going away. I know y'all were big fans, but Pillow got to take a break. I don't have enough money to pay Pillow for all their time. Bechdel made her name as a cartoonist in the 1980s with the Out and Proud strip Dykes to Watch Out For. By contrast, her graphic memoir, something I've never heard of before, that's really interesting. Her graphic memoir was a tale of suppressed sexuality, her own and especially her father's. Bruce Bechdel, the manager of a funeral home, hence the book's arch title, was a complex, highly literate man and also a quintessential closet case. The story of his death, entwined with Bechdel's own process of coming out as lesbian, only furthers the layers she's working through. A graphic novel classic, the inspiration for a successful musical and perpetual target for anti-LGBTQ+ book banners, it remains a powerful story of family dynamics and self-discovery. This is so interesting. This is so cool. Like, I've never heard of a graphic memoir or anything like that. This is going to get added to the maybe list because there are definitely books on this list that I want to read more than this. But this is really, just based on the fact that it's a graphic comic, but also a memoir, is really interesting. Into Thin Air, I believe I've heard about this. I believe a lot of people have heard about this, seeing how it's a #1 national bestseller. But this is a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster written by John Krakauer, released in 1997. I read Into Thin Air in one night, my hands clasped so tight around the pages it actually warped the book. It is so expertly crafted, so harrowing, it reads as though it is fiction because something this tragic and awful couldn't possibly be real. Again, I recognize that I'm judging these books based purely on these reviews, but sometimes a review like this can make or break a book, and this is one of the ones that makes this book. And this is what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if this technically classifies as true crime, but it is a historical aspect of this incredibly tragic and terrible thing. But written in the right way, it can be incredibly interesting and also just a great, great read. So just off of this review, I've never really been interested in Mount Everest or anything like that, but just based off of this review, it is going to be added to the definitive cop list. Next up, we have Barbara Ehrenreich's 2001 book, Nickel and Dimed, on Not Getting By in America. The late journalist and muckraker's most famous book has inspired a whole subgenre of stunt memoirs, but there was nothing frivolous about this undertaking. To see how long she can make ends meet working everyday hospitality and custodial jobs in the wake of the Clinton administration's dismantling of the social safety net. Hold on, I'm interested. The labor, waitressing, janitorial was physically demanding, the wages terrible, the treatment by bosses and customers often worse. America's working poor, she found, are victims of a system that's designed to exploit them and also keep them from putting up a protest. Aaron Reich's effort to organize a union doesn't take an essential text of American wealth inequality. Hold on. This is getting added to the maybe list, even though I'm very, very interested in reading this. I just have other books and my TBR that I am far more interested in reading, at least right now. But this has copped my interest. The camera ran out of battery, but we're back with number 7, Catherine Boo's Behind the Beautiful Forever's Life, Death, and Hope in a Mumbai Undercity. Midnight was closing in, the one-legged woman was grievously burned, and Mumbai police were coming for Abdul and his father. Boo's book begins. Crazy beginning to a book. Its focus is on the lives within a temporary settlement close to Mumbai airport and its beautiful forever luxury hotels. The family added center is the Hussains, Muslims in a largely Hindu community. When a mentally disturbed neighbor sets herself on fire and a slumlord tries to extort money from them, the family gets tangled in the corruption that keeps a stranglehold on the slum's inhabitants. Boo, who spent 3 years at the slum, that's crazy, emphasizes family ties and writes luminously about the daily struggle of Mumbai's poor. This is getting added to the maybe list, but ooh, it's got my attention. Very similar to Nickel and Dimed. This has got my attention. For this author to spend 3 years in the Mumbai slums and write this book, I know there's something great here. Next up, I hate this cover a lot, but we have at number 6, Random Family, Love, Drugs, Trouble, and Coming of Age in the Bronx, written by Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc in 2003. LeBlanc began writing on this classic of nonfiction reportage while covering the story of a Bronx heroin dealer for Newsday. Embedding herself with his family for several years, she reveals the way poor families are stymied in their efforts to get by. Lack of money, lousy landlords, addiction, parental abandonment, and more. LeBlanc never moves her camera away from the ground level. There are no policy prescriptions, no litanies of statistics, and no melodramatic statements about pity or persistence. A bar. That gives it the grit and grain of a novel, but also the intensity of lived experience. No American book has captured it in such relentless, affecting detail. My mom was born in the Bronx. I got family in New York and New Jersey. This is, I'm interested. Wow. That's such a good description of a book. Definitive cop. Like, definitive cop. Next up, we have Heavy, an American memoir by Keith Lehman, written in 2018. Simply put, no other book in recent memory has so beautifully and meaningfully reported on the agony and ecstasy of living in America with a black male body. We have a few books on this list so far of what it's like to be a black person and living the black experience in America. This book definitely interests me, but not enough to put it on the definitive cop list. We'll put it on the maybe list for right now, and then maybe revisit it after I've read the new Jim Crow and the other book on the black experience. I'm forgetting what it's called right now. Men We Reaped. Men We Reaped. Number 4 on this list is another Pulitzer Prize winner. Oh my God. Evicted. I guess it should be a Pulitzer Prize winner, or at least a lot of these books should be if they're the best nonfiction books of the last 30 years. So maybe I'm the dumb one here. We have Evicted, Poverty and Profit in an American City by Matthew Desmond, released in 2016. This explosive, eye-opening work came from Ivy League professor Desmond moving to a trailer park and rooming house in a poverty-stricken part of Milwaukee. A critical examination of income disparity in the U.S., Evicted puts the people living the bottom of the American dream at the center. He paints a sympathetic and honest picture of those living precariously and the insurmountable everyday challenges they face. More than just a document of their experiences, Evicted is an ethical call to action to end the exploitation of the poor, an absolute must-read for everyone who still believes America is a nation of equal opportunity. That makes me sound like a bad person, because I was going to put this on the maybe list, but now that last sentence makes me look like a bad person. It's going on the maybe list because I have a whole TBR to get through and some books on this list I'm definitely more interested in reading. But this book is right up my alley, similar to some of the other books that we've gone through that have still ended up on the maybe list. This book is right up my alley. I just want to read it maybe a little later, which is okay. Ta-Nehisi Coates, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. I believe they just had a book either on the top 10 or the top 100 books of the year by the New York Times, but this book is Between the World and Me, released in 2015. I was struck by Coates' visual dexterity, especially the scene with the elevator and the violence that defines white supremacy in the most mundane settings in the 21st century. It afflicts our most vulnerable children who are defenseless to the entitlement of whiteness. I loved the book so much, I accidentally gave it to my dad for Christmas 2 years in a row. Another great example of a maybe book. There isn't a lot to go off of in this review here. Like I said, we're basing everything on the cover and the review, and there isn't a lot to go on the review here, but I've heard very good things about this author, so I'd love to get into their work, whether it's this book or the book that I'm talking about on the New York Times list. Either way, I am going to get to this author eventually, just not immediately. This book right here is a book I've seen, and I've heard a lot about this author, John Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, released in 2005. You can see right here, I was looking up a different book because I always confuse it with The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell, which I've honestly heard not great things about, but I have heard very good things about this book. Didion's husband of nearly 40 years, John Gregory Dunn, died of a massive heart attack at the couple's dining room table in 2003. Her memoir offered an intimate account of the ways that grief tears us away from normalcy. For a woman who had made a reputation as a lucid, sharp chronicler of the reality of American lives, Didion struggled with the irrational thoughts that flooded her mind afterward. Narrating her own way through her own deep, isolating grief, she wrote her most popular book. We cannot, she writes, quote, know ahead of the fact, and here lies the heart of the difference between grief as we imagine it and grief as it is, the unending absence that follows, the void, the very opposite of meaning, the relentless succession of moments during which we will confront the experience of meaningless itself. Respectfully, I don't know if I want to read a very intense book about grief and the process of it right now. I don't think my brain is ready for that sort of writing. But for some reason, the essay collection by Joan Didion, the White Album, is like popping off on like feminist literature that guys carry around so they can talk to women TikTok. I'm happy that Joan Didion's getting some hype because I've only heard good things about her and her writing, so I don't know if this is one of her books that I'm going to be reading immediately, but I do want to read at least some of her writing in the near future just to see if it's for me because I've only heard good things about it, like I said. The number one book on this list, I don't know if they're ranked or if it's just 30 books randomly sorted out here, but we have The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration, written by Isabel Wilkerson. Wilkerson's magisterial tale of the Great Migration is an incomparable study of the motivations behind a decades-long social movement that brought millions of black people from the Jim Crow South to better, if still often bitterly racist, fortunes in the North and West. Its widescreen picture of the phenomenon is braided with details of people like Ida Mae Brandon Gladney, a Mississippi sharecropper who headed to Chicago to escape violent racism at home, only to discover a complicated network of bigotry and industry in the Midwest. This book is reminding me of a movie I just watched, Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler, because in that movie you have twins who went to Chicago and came back to the Deep South, and in this book you have people escaping these Jim Crow South areas to other places in the United States to try and find freedom. So this sounds really interesting. This is going to be on the lower end, but it's still going to go on the definitive cop list. This book sounds really interesting, and like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of books about Black America, about the Black experience, and this seems like a historical take on that, which is really interesting to me. It makes sense that the number one book on this list, the very last book on this list, is going to make it onto the definitive cop list because this sounds really interesting, and this has been a great list overall. Excuse me while I do the write-up of all of our lists, and then we could see how many books are getting added and to what list they're being added to. All right, I just finished making the list right now. I'll have it pop up on screen now so y'all can see. I also didn't include Sapiens because I already read Sapiens, and I moved some stuff around. I think I moved Citizen down into the Not Right Now list. I think I moved Thick up from Not Right Now into Maybe, and I think I moved Nickel and Dimed up into the definitive cop as well after I did a little bit of research, and it seemed really interesting and something I would love to read. But we are going to copy this definitive cop list right here, go over to Books Wanted. This is the list I made when I did the 100 books of the year, the New York Times video. This is the first addition we're making to it. Control V. There we go. This definitely needs some formatting work, but it gets the job done. That's going to be it for today's video, y'all. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like, comment, and subscribe, all that good business. If there's some nonfiction books that were not mentioned in this list that you really enjoyed, please let me know. This Books Wanted list could always use a little bit more nonfiction in it. Or if you're on the complete opposite spectrum and you think there were books on this list that didn't deserve to be on this list, leave a comment down below for that as well. I would really appreciate being able to get even even in the smallest conversation with y'all. I hope y'all were able to get at least some book recommendations out of this article, out of this video. Like I was able to do something that makes you happy, do something that makes you some money, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace!